Vika, 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 Vika.
It's kinda wild how much of a video game's files may not even appear in the game, right? Like, content that's just completely unused. And I'm not talking about stuff you can glitch in to see or glitch out of the map to find. I'm talking about stuff that's 100% unviewable without hacks or digging in the files themselves. Be it very odd test materials, unused content, or materials that break copyright law, and beyond, they're all unused and all really fun to talk about. Before we start, I want to say that this list was made possible by the website The Cutting Room Floor. They're all about cool discoveries like these, and so much more that isn't in this video, so please give them a visit. Okay, let's go. Pokémon Channel is a 2003 game for the Nintendo GameCube that basically comes down to you sitting down with a Pikachu and watching Pokemon-themed TV. There's not much more to it than that, but it can be a cute time waster if you're a kid. Looking in the files, you can find a lot of test animations and scenarios, as well as a locked-off feature to save pictures to the GameCube SD card adapter. But what gets it on here are the debug things that are only present on the last released PAL version for some reason. First up is Kapika.pkc, an animation test that goes through all of Pikachu's animations on a solid blue screen, which of course makes it possible for video editors to do basically anything with this footage. But my favorite is Puake.pkc. In this debug test, you get to throw apples at Pikachu like it's Pokemon Snap, and he instantly eats them, getting bigger. Once he's reached a certain size, another will spawn. The limit to this is unknown, but yeah, no idea why this is here because nothing in the game remotely resembles this, even in Control. Here's a quick one. In the 2011 puzzle game by Atlas, Catherine, you can find an absurd amount of unused and test materials on the disc, including some awesome tentative title screens. But anyways, the real meat here is that there is an original arrangement of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl's wild Pokemon battle theme. Check this out. If you had any doubts about this, the file is named poke_btl_loop, and there's another piece of unused content that shows a leaderboard filled with Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire references. Lately, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has proven to be an excessively popular anime and meme machine, but many years before that, Capcom, specifically the same team that made Third Strike, made a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure arcade game based off of Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. In my mind, it's probably one of the best fighters ever, alongside its more serious brother Third Strike, but that's beside the point. Oh, and if you're unaware, a lot of the names in this series are references to music, so be prepared to hear some weird things. So, technically, there's two versions of this game. The first version released in the arcade and was called JoJo's Venture in English, and this ended up being ported to the PS1. The second version is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Heritage to the Future, and featured 8 more characters. This version would end up ported to the Dreamcast as just JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in English. Between these two versions, there's a crazy amount of unused content. In JoJo's Venture, there's an unused classic Winners Don't Use Drugs screen, evidence of a minigame where you fight Enya, and some sort of role for one of my favorite stands, Judgment and his user Cameo. Heritage for the Future has unused animations for Joseph, Vanilla Ice, and more interestingly, evidence of a playable Death 13 and Tower of Grey, who was very nearly finished while Death 13 still did exist as a secret boss, if unplayable. In both, there's a ton of evidence to show that sub-boss in Duel was going to be playable at some point, and there's even concept art showing this. Now, I admit, this game gets on here just thanks to its incredible breadth of unused content, but one thing I find especially cool is this unused sprite. This is a parody of how Ten, the kanji for heaven, appears when Akuma uses his raging demon in the Street Fighter series. Because this is the kanji Inu, which means dog, we can imply that Iggy would have used this along with his Sandstorm Super, which has the same iconic input as the raging demon, or at least a transliteration of it. And I just find that kind of funny is all. Grand Theft Auto 3 was a very groundbreaking game, and you know that. In fact, it was so groundbreaking that its unused files even led to later innovations. Long before GTA 5 added a full first-person mode as a special feature for the PS4 and Xbone, cough up that extra $60, GTA 3 was experimenting with it on at least the PC version. On the PC, first-person models and animations exist for a lot of GTA 3 weapons. The way they animate is kind of interesting too. The reloads remind me of the ones from GTA 5, but the position of the guns is more of a typical first-person shooter. It gets a little more interesting though. These animations rely on skeletal animation, while standard GTA 3 animations just don't. Alongside these first-person animations are skeletal animations seemingly intended for Vice City, which was originally an expansion pack for GTA 3. So it could be true that the full first-person mode was instead intended for Vice City, but no files in that game make reference to this. I like this one in particular because it shows how a cool idea can appear deep in game files, seemingly lost to the pains of development, and then come out as a true feature at a later date. The original Super Smash Bros. Had this too, with unused sound files that imply final smashes were going to be in the game at some point. I picked the GTA 3 one instead because I thought less people knew about it. Let's just say Smash is an honorary number 11. Next. In the 2010 FPS you've probably played, Halo Reach, there is a removed Saber Slayer game mode. If you haven't played Reach, or honestly if you forgot, the Saber is a spaceship you fly in the campaign only for a short time. It's legit space combat that was not in any of the previous Halo games. At one point, it was programmed into the game to allow multiplayer Slayer with exclusively space combat. Saber and the Covenant spaceship Seraph graphics exist for Tools of Destruction, images that show the weapon you got the most kills with. Oh, and a teleporter too, despite Reach not having telefragging. The game mode was scrapped for being too repetitive, which is a dumb excuse. I mean, they could have expanded it. Nah, actually they mentioned it caused a lot of console performance issues as well, which is what I believe really killed it. Considering how few space combat games there are in the mainstream, it would have been great to have that here, especially since it would have likely introduced tons of people to the concept. Ed, Edd n Eddy, The Misadventures is an alright video game adaptation of the Ed, Edd n Eddy cartoon. I've always found it a bit short, but it's worth a shot if you're a fan. Now, one of the main draws of the Ed, Edd n Eddy cartoon was its very distinctive art style, which is immediately evident just from watching the show's intro. Kinda odd that the intro never shows up in the game. Well, among some other unused video and the song Go Daddy-O by the band Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, you can find the intro on the disc. Here you go. Yeesh, what's up with those teeth? I mean, not only is this intro like 30 seconds shorter, but it's clear not a lot of effort went into it. Must have been scrapped earlier, made as a joke. Well... Eastern Mind, The Lost Souls of Tong No is an incredibly surreal adventure game for the Mac and PC directed by Japanese artist Osamu Sato, the same guy who directed the much more famous LSD Dream emulator. Which is ironic, because LSD Dream emulator was never released outside of Japan while Eastern Mind was. If you're more familiar with LSD Dream Emulator, you may instinctively believe that Eastern Mind is similar and not really having direction or a real plot. But this isn't true. Eastern Mind has you take the role of a guy named Rin. Rin's soul was stolen by the island of Tongno, which is actually a picture of Osamu Sato's head colored green. His friend Yashiro gives him a temporary soul that will allow him to travel into Tongno and get his true soul back. The main gimmick of the game is that death is not a failure, but rather a part of progressing in this game. You simply reincarnate as a new creature each time. If the odd plot, odd art, and the fact that this is a point-and-click game from the 90s hasn't tipped you off yet, this game is really confusing and hard to complete. And someone on the localization team agreed. Hidden in the save data directory is a hints text file. Instead of hints though, it's a text walkthrough of the game in English, which is cool if it didn't end before the actual end of the game. Maybe he got caught? There's a lot of games from this era I wish had something like this hidden in the files. Even Osamu Sato was aware of how confusing the game was, so the sequel, Chu Tang, is a much simpler experience if still pretty surreal. But it bombed so hard it was thought to be completely lost for years. Can't win them all, huh? Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga is another one of those games that doesn't really need an introduction. It's a GBA Mario RPG that's really good, and you should give it a shot sometime if you haven't already. It's one of the best games on the system, period. In the files you can find a wealth of unused content, mostly in terms of graphics. It is revealed by looking at the raw files for the battle backgrounds that it seems all of them would be able to scroll to some extent, like what would happen in a later game and a few battles in this game. There's also graphics and a tile map for a scene resembling Wrecking Crew, and there's a boatload of testing materials as well as variants of some enemies that are never seen. But the real juice comes from the Star Beans Cafe. In the original game, you can make a variety of coffee brews that will cause Professor Egad from Luigi's Mansion to show up accompanied by a GBA rendition of his lab theme. He'll test out the coffee brew and then give you an item, some of which you might notice look a lot like things from other Nintendo games. Like, look at that. That's clearly a piece of the Triforce from Zelda, but it's called the Great Force instead. Originally, this cafe was going to be host to a Smash-esque cavalcade of cameos, including the already present Egad, but also Wario, Fox McCloud, Captain Olimar, Samus Aran, the Excite Bike Racer, and Link. As you can see, sprites and dialogue exist for all of these scenes. With the exception of the Excite Spring and arguably the Game Boy Horror, all of the other items you are given had their names changed to not be direct references to their origins, even if it is still kinda obvious sometimes. Expanding Smash's style of crossover to other Nintendo games is something I'm a huge fan of. I was ecstatic as a kid seeing Master Hand show up in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror with his copy ability giving Kirby something similar to his melee moveset. It was great again to see Animal Crossing characters and Link be playable in Mario Kart 8 along with 2 F-Zero tracks. What I'm getting at is that I feel like cutting these scenes was a big mistake because these kinds of crossovers are great. But with available sprites and dialogue, along with the huge popularity of this game, I find it odd that there's no ROM hack that puts this back in, perhaps with some custom music. You know, maybe someday. On September 1st, 2004, 34 militants of the Mujahideen-affiliated Riyad-us-Salihin Islamic insurgency group stormed the School No. 1 in Beslan, North Ossetia, Russia. Taking over 1,000 hostages, they established themselves and began killing hostages immediately. They specifically targeted any men they deemed could fight back and individuals who spoke in any language but Russian. Explosives were wired all over the school. People starved and suffered heat stroke, but at least negotiations were progressing. But on the third day, an explosion was set off before negotiations could finish. Why? It's still incredibly controversial, as are most details with what exactly happened. In the resulting catastrophe, 334 innocent people were killed, and over 700 were injured. This nightmare of a situation led to significant federal government reform that strengthened the powers of the Kremlin and the president in a way similar to the US post 9/11, making this one of the most important events in recent Russian history. This photograph by Yuri Tutov shows a small moment of desperation during the crisis. A man running while carrying a child with no shirt, likely removed to survive the intense heat of the gym where the children hostages were packed. Who knows what kind of panic they were experiencing at the time. This photo also appears as a test image for the NamCam feature of Mario Kart Arcade GP, released just 1 year after the crisis. Here's the biggest one, the craziest one, my favorite, and as you'll come to find out, something hypocritical. Animal Crossing is a 2002 GameCube port of the Japanese exclusive Dobutsu no Mori, or Animals Forest, for the N64. It spawned a series of similarly calm games. I'm a big fan, actually, but a feature that is only present on the GameCube is the inclusion of some real, honest, full NES games. We're talking Donkey Kong, Excite Bike, Balloon Fight, Punch-Out, and more, and you don't even have to pay like $5 for each of them. There's also 4 unobtainable games. Mario Bros. And Ice Climber are technically acquirable through America-exclusive e-reader cards. Super Mario Bros. Is Japan only, given by a Famitsu giveaway, and The Legend of Zelda is just straight unobtainable anywhere. It should go without saying that with something like an action replay, all of these are easily obtainable. It's not really the games themselves I want to talk about, but how they are played and a cut feature that goes along with that. These games are being emulated by an emulator on the disc. The fun fact here is that this emulator can play any NES game, not just those included on the disc. You may remember that it is possible to acquire a blank NES in-game that, when interacted with, will only ever display the message, "I want to play my NES, but I don't have any software." This is a true statement, because when you activate that NES, it really does scan for NES ROMs on your memory card. The game executes a fully functional ROM loader that even includes the ability to patch ROMs, and by extension, Animal Crossing too, thus allowing for modding. I want to make it very clear, all of this is a new discovery. Information on this built-in emulator first came around thanks to security researcher James Chambers in July of 2018. Thanks to his efforts, it is now known how to insert homebrew into Animal Crossing, which could turn out to be a fun hobby for some people. As a reminder, all of this information is sourced below. Okay, now for one more interesting note. For this, we need to know a name: Tomohiro Kawase. Kawase is the man responsible for the emulator in Animal Crossing, as well as with emulation on a variety of Nintendo projects like the e-reader and the GB Tower in Pokémon Stadium. Before he was hired, he was a notable contributor to the 90s iNES emulator. That project was headed up by Dr. Murat Fazlin, who has made some other revolutionary emulators. A dead ringer for any program using iNES is the presence of ROMs that use the .NES file extension. And guess what? That file extension is all over the NES ROMs in Animal Crossing, meaning that Nintendo willingly applied third-party emulation code into their game, while still asserting that such emulation is toxic for the video game industry to this day. But it gets worse. User Kurvavi Abadas of Resetera did some digging to find that the later Virtual Console version of Super Mario Bros. Is identical to the version used in Animal Crossing, implying that the entire process Nintendo uses for emulating the NES on later consoles was based on the third-party emulator iNES. Somehow, it gets worse again. Because thanks to Eurogamer contributor Chris Bratt's communication with iNES creator Murat Fazlin, it was discovered that the previously mentioned Super Mario Bros. ROM, the one that was used for a Famitsu giveaway for Animal Crossing and on the Wii Virtual Console, was downloaded from the internet. It is not an original dump made by Nintendo. They literally downloaded a Super Mario Bros. ROM online and then sold it to you. Nintendo has declined this explanation but refused to comment further, and all I have left to say is that Nintendo, code doesn't lie. Okay, so that's all. Again, I'd like to thank the cutting room floor and all of its contributors for not only making this video possible, but just keeping up one of my favorite sites on the net. I will be linking the site and their Patreon below as thanks. If you have anything to say, comment below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.